This is the Mako XL. There isn't much I can say about this watch that hasn't been said already. It's got a huge following. They've got a Orient Mako USA version. The original Mako, this is the XL, but the original Orient Mako now has its own dedicated following. And people that prefer that over the version 2 or the version 3 or the XL. The XL is about 45.5 millimeters in width. It's got a 13.3 millimeter thickness, which is not that thick for a watch that's of this size. It is a very good looking watch. The obvious comparisons to one of the most beautiful and sought after watches ever made, the Rolex Submariner, which has a much higher price tag, to say the least. The main difference being, well, aside from this being made by Orient, and this pusher over here at 2 o'clock, which changes the day of the week. This thing sports a fairly matte black dial. It also has a black chapter ring. There's really not much texture to that dial. Not much at all, which is very nice for a watch. This size with the aggressive hands that it has and those applied indices. So there's a mix of minimal and bold going on in this design, which is actually very, very nice. So the biggest question about a watch like this is it just a straight up copy? You know, a lot of us like to use the word homage or homage watches, however you want to say it. A lot of them are straight up ripoffs. They really are. There are so many ripoffs of the Rolex Submariner, the most copied watch there's probably ever been made. Even, you can argue, the Seamaster. It's just, and every single dive watch that's come after the Submariner, you can argue is just a copy or an homage to the Submariner. Well, there's really not much you can do within the confines of a diver design. You've got a timing bezel, you've got a crown, you have to have, well, you don't have to have crown guards, but usually it's a good idea to have crown guards on it. You can put a date in there if you want. You can just make it very symmetrical and leave only the indices. It's a watch and it's a diver. It tells the time, it counts down, and it goes on your wrist. And that's basically it. Within the confines of that design, there has been a remarkable variety in dive watches over the decades. There's been a lot of technological innovations as far as automatics go or can go. The power reserves have increased. A lot of different features have been added. I think there's even some tourbillon dive watches, which I don't know if that makes a lot of technical sense. But dive watches really, in the end, are only dive watches if they are two watches. In terms of taking a beating, in terms of just putting it on your wrist and going. You don't care if you drop it or it breaks or you lose it or somehow winds up at the bottom of the ocean, given that most of us don't actually ever use our dive watches as dive watches. I have actually, but I used to have a blue Mako XL that I actually used for diving. I went diving with it. It was a discovery dive, and basically a dive master held my hand the whole way, but hey, I was wearing my actual dive watch and I took it diving, unlike most of probably even Submariner owners out there. Using a dive watch as a dive watch. It's crazy. And it only cost me about $80 a use. This one cost me about $130, brand new, box and everything, and that terrible bracelet that comes along with it. I mean, this watch is everything a dive watch should be. 200 meters water resistance. It's big, visible. Blue's okay, but it's there. This is just jewelry. That's really all it is these days, but it's nice to know that it still works for what it was originally designed to do. Years ago, I sold my first Orient Mako XL, and I regretted it pretty much every day since. So I saw this guy on sale, and I loved the dial. I was afraid that it was just going to look like a cheap Rolex knockoff, but as soon as I got it, I knew that this thing was pretty different and pretty special. In terms of design, it's, I want to say, familiar, but still somewhat unique. Orient has definitely taken it and put their touches onto it. And they've done things like using a very, very, very robust and frankly cheap movement and modified it and added this little pusher here, which is the biggest thing that differentiates it from an actual Submariner, which, while very nice, is very expensive and really these days a status symbol. Really, nothing against that. I have a Tudor Black Bay and a Rolex Datejust, but you know, dive watch is something you should be able to throw at someone and run away if you need to. Anyway, 120 click unidirectional bezel, which I don't really care if it's 60 or 120. I don't know anyone that uses dive watches to dive down to 30 seconds. Anyway, this thing, you can tell where they kind of cut corners. The case doesn't have anything too special going on with it. But that said, it is very nicely designed. Screwed on case back, screwed on crown. Now the pusher is on there, but somehow still maintains water resistance down to 200 meters. Kind of cool, interesting. They can do that with pushers. Now the shade of green obviously is not at all like the shade of green that's on the Submariner Hulk or the Sub Hulk. It is its very own light green. It's not like a British racing green, which is what the shade of green on the Sub Hulk reminds me of. It's like a Aston Martin British racing green. Really, that's what it is. The other thing that Orient did that I love is they kept the dial black, and it's matte black, so it offsets these applied indices, stainless steel applied indices, really nicely. There's a white accent around the day and date indicators. That the Orient, I guess that we could call that a coat of arms, it's actually applied, and it's quite nice. Screw down crown is a little finicky, but it's easy enough to operate. It's not a signed crown, which is fine. I don't really care. 120 bucks new, but that's, I guess, gray market. 80 bucks used in excellent condition with the box, the bracelet, everything. You can't really complain about that too much. The writing where it says, the writing on the dial where it says water resist, it's in script, and I really like that. I think that's a good touch. Makes it a little bit more dressy, but not really a dressy watch, although with that green, you put it on a nice leather strap, you can pretty much wear it anywhere, especially if you have the wrist for it. Now, this being just shy of 45 millimeters is kind of big. My wrists have gotten smaller over the past few months. I'm moving towards watches that are closer to 36 to 39 millimeters, and this is really starting to push it. A little bit about Orient. They were established, not in the Orient name, but they were established in 1901. Their movements are pretty much in-house. Are they completely in-house? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure how much of the movements are Seiko, how much of them is actually retooled, how much of it is an original. Are they a true manufacturer? Who knows? So they sold watches and manufactured their own cases and all sorts of components up until the 1930s. But they didn't actually use the name Orient until the late 1950s. And honestly, I don't care if it's got direct lineage from 1901. Most watch companies that say they've been around since the 1800s don't. They've been sold multiple times. They're part of like the Etta group or part of Richemont. Who knows who actually owns watch companies? And they are just jewelry, essentially. But I've owned a number of Orients over the years, and they've never really failed me. They've always been reliable, even though the margin of error in timekeeping in the older Orients, like this Mako XL, is something like 25 to 30 seconds per day, which is crazy. But I mean, we have cell phones, and I've never actually owned a watch that was that far off. Even some really, really cheap Seiko 5s, including this $80 watch, keeps about 10 to 12 seconds a day on average, give or take. So anyway, I honestly think this is the best value in automatic watches. It takes some cues from one of my favorite dive watches of all time, but it is in its own right one of my favorite dive watches of all time. A lot of people would argue that this watch, or rather the 40 millimeter version of this watch, is the best value in automatics. I don't think so. I disagree. This watch has a very unique shape. It's got that 4 o'clock crown. It's got some pretty nice but short lugs. It's got a decent bezel, good loom, Seiko reliability, Seiko heritage. But no, I disagree. I think the Orient Mako and the Mako XL watches, really any of Orient's dive watches, are overall, I think, better. It's just there's something about the brand. Most people don't know it. It's not as prolific as Seiko. They don't make as many watches. Not that many people know it, especially in the US. So it feels a little exclusive in a way. Now, it is a real watch made by a real watchmaker or watch company. They have interesting design. They have different tiers. They have Orient Star. There was also Royal Orient. They do different dial colors, black, green, blue, all sorts. And the overall aesthetic on their watches is pretty interesting, and it's cool. Sometimes they take risks, and I don't know if they pay off. I don't know if Orient's making any money, but I know they're making watches, and they're making good watches. They keep making them, and I hope they keep making them for a very long time. A lot of people don't like the day and date indicators on dive watches. They actually don't want anything on them except for them to be able to tell the time, which is fine, but I think that kind of sets this watch apart. This is something that Japanese watch makers seem to do a lot of, is they put day and date, especially the day indicators, into their watches. I think that's interesting. I think it's different. I think it's cool, and I like it. And I like how this differentiates the Mako. The dial is a little boring, but it's basically, it looks like a Seiko Stargate or Seiko Monster dial. It looks like the type of dial many Seiko watches have. But again, a little different. It's got Orient on the dial. It's got that nice script. The edge on this bezel is actually very nice, and it's very easy to turn. It's not a coin edge, really. It looks like more like a gear. It looks nothing at all like the edge of Rolex bezels. I think my favorite thing about this watch is that it looks like it cost a lot more than it did, which is something you want to be able to say for most things you own. My Datejust costs a lot more than it looks like it costs, especially given that when it came out, it was worth much less and it cost much less. Now, Orient's got their following Orient's following is growing slowly, steadily. I don't know how it's doing in the US, but I see them pop up more on watch forums and watch sale forums. It's nice to see Orient kind of getting a little bit of attention. The bracelet on this watch sucks. I'm not even going to talk about it. It's terrible. I think they should just sell these watches head only. I've had this watch for about 1.5 years, and I've had no issues with it. I'm not afraid of losing it. I'm not afraid of dropping it. I'm not afraid of breaking it. And that's really what a tool watch should be about. No worries. Just pick it up, shake it around a little bit, set the time, and you're good to go. I think there's something about this watch that really differentiates it from most other divers out there, specifically the diver that it is kind of modeled after. So, is it the dial? Is it those weird hands? Is it the indices? Is it the fact that it says Orient and it has that weird, rather European-looking coat of arms? Is it the fact that it has a day and date complication? Is it the size of the case? Is it the way it's designed? Is it the crown? Is it the bezel? Is it the way they design the bezel? Is it that little date pusher? No, I don't think it's even that. It's the lugs. There's a beauty and balance to the lugs on this watch that make this watch work as its own thing. Now, they're not really straight, right? They're kind of pointed and they seem a little cut off at the top, right? Maybe they should be a little bit longer. I do like long lugs. Long lugs are great. Nomos is a watchmaker that makes longer, pointier lugs, and they're kind of famous for it, and it is a very, very beautiful bit of design when it comes to watches. A lot of companies don't pay attention to the lugs. They're just kind of there. Now, this watch balances the absolutely massive size with these thick lugs. And they do have this polish that comes up across the top. They're not quite turned over like Omega's lugs tend to be, they're not straight, they're not kind of big, thick, and toolish. They're really their own thing. And that's what makes this watch really, really beautiful to me. It's this element of the balance of the lug with the size of the watch. And it really makes it its own thing, makes it original. It kind of starts off in the beginning as an homage to a well-known and very sought-after watch with a waiting list as long as any. And it kind of walks off into its own little world. It takes its own little spot in any serious watch collection. This is a truly amazing watch. It's beautiful. You can take it anywhere. You can do anything with it. And it's a purchase that I don't think anyone who's interested at all in watches would ever regret. Oh, yeah, it looks great on basically any strap. NATO's, leather, hand stitched, Miltat, all of it. But my preferred way to wear this watch is to pretend that it's 1,000,000 degrees out and I'm on a boat in the middle of the ocean. If that were really the case, I'd be scared out of my mind because I'm a terrible swimmer. I'm also not dive certified. Anyway, that's my favorite way to wear this watch, on a braided purlon, however they say it, strap. There it is. Wear it with anything. More importantly, you can wear it while you do anything. Just everything a watch like this was designed to do.